Hi, everybody, and welcome to Reed's Read Spider-Man Crawl Space Edition. Check us out at SpidermanCrawlspace.com. Well, I'm here, everybody, to celebrate the big anniversary issue of Amazing Spider-Man 950. That's right, 950 issues. Wow. I mean, after 60 years, it's amazing how much Spider-Man's lost this long. So we're going to go into the main story, of course, by Zeb Wells and, of course, John Romita Sr. I'm also going to put in our buddy Scott Hanna, who actually returned for inks on this. So how did the big anniversary issue work, especially with this big issue all focused pretty much on Tombstone? Well, let's get into the pros. First of all, I have to say it's actually pretty well paced. We get to see the earlier flashbacks with Lonnie Lincoln, a.k.a. Alonzo, because that's actually Tombstone's real actual name. And I liked his early days working with the Kingpin out in Safari and the hunting, and of course learning the things about lions and how the prides can actually attack the kids and sire them, but also how it works in the gang. It's a really metamorphosis. It's a really nice unfolding of the storyline as we see the talk here as Tombstone's getting move everything else to try to get his control back over, because he knows the Kingpin's coming back into control over New York City. It's actually well paced and actually some great things too, especially when you see Spider-Man messing up a lot of Tombstone's gun shipments and a couple of other crime areas to, of course, the big battle when, of course, Tombstone fights Peter Parker, and even though Peter's got to pretty much hold it back to make sure Tombstone doesn't realize he's Spider-Man. It's actually well constructed, and I do like the pacing of the story, especially when everything gets thrown out from under the rug. And, of course, we find out, of course, that Tombstone, of course, gets arrested by not only She-Hulk and, of course, Luke Cage, but we find out that his own daughter, Janice Lincoln, has actually turned state's evidence against him and put him down. It's a really cool story, especially the build-up throughout it, from everything from Randy and Janice's back together, Peter talking about he's at kind of a square zero after leaving Osborne Industries, and a few other things. It's actually pretty well done, and the fight scenes are pretty nicely done. And I really like the ending when it gets revealed that Janice has backstabbed her own father and, of course, turned everything of it. And it's actually pretty good, especially the end when, of course, Tombstone's looking at realizing his own daughter has betrayed him. And like years ago, what happened to him on that safari, he now is going to probably have to turn against his own family. It's really seeing the dark paths. We've seen the rise and fall of Tombstone through this entire run by Zeb Wells. And actually, this is one story that actually feels like it's been going very, very well. But that's kind of where the pros stop. Cons there. First of all, I'm not going to go into the biggest con of the story. I'll talk about that here shortly. But also how things are done. We, of course, get the pieces of not only all the flashbacks and storylines with Tombstone and the setup of like, hey, Janice and Randy together. Peter has a severance package, but he's actually got other things going on the side that leads to the story. I think the backstory, when we actually see a follow-up from last issue, the Rhino's gone on the date, that the story is actually set up just before Tombstone is arrested, and, of course, everything ends up in court with him. It kind of feels like the story's out of place. There was so much work here to get everything from Tombstone, from the flashback to where he was there in court, and then we have this second sub-story which kind of falls up on the plot point from the Rhino going on the dating app last issue, thanks to Screwball, where we actually find out that Peter and Spider-Man had set up everything else to make sure Peter was not only able to get Tombstone entrapped to get arrested in the court against him, but how he had his own life was already on the round. He actually finds out early on, as we find out the issue, he knew Tombstone was going to probably try to kill him. And it's actually very interesting, but it takes a little bit of the story when we find out the setup for it was already basically done after the main story was over, and it kind of makes it kind of fuse. Going into the biggest con with the issue, of course, is the story with Paul Rabin. We're basically getting into where they are trying to make us sympathetic about it. Him meeting out with the 616 version of Kale, who was of course working on his science cases with his father on his Earth, and possibly was a little bit more, as it's hinted in here too. Feels like it's very shoehorned in. The flashbacks of Paul basically trying to be like Peter, that he threw money at everything. He was trying to avoid his responsibilities. His father was losing more of his mind, and some of the health issues, to only turn around and find out he had done these sacrifices, killed his buddy Kale, and basically led to him taking out and destroying 3 billion people on his Earth for Wabib. It doesn't make it feel any better. It makes us feel like we're really trying to shoehorn Paul in to be more of a sympathetic character, and basically Zeb is going setting it up to make it look like Paul is probably not going to survive the end of this run, which many of us aren't going to really, I hate to say it, are not going to be upset when we don't see Paul anymore. It doesn't make it a better character or study, but there's been so much rewriting continuity on it, it makes it pretty bad. The fact that we don't know how Paul got all this extra money in the 616 when he was apparently swimming in it on his Earth, and the fact he actually looked better on his Earth with a Ted Lasso look versus here where he's got the big beard, he's feeling sorry for himself, grungy, man bun, and money. We don't even know where he is, and he's trying to make amends by, I'm going to pay for my Kale, this universe's Kale to make sure he fights his health issues, which is cancer or something else. We're never really officially put into it, but the fact is it doesn't make his character, and it also makes it look worse of how Paul was working with Mary Jane. As they say, you're reading the story wrong. Well, if it's true that, Paul is either gay or bi, it really makes everything with him being around, him taking away Mary Jane with the fake kids from the beginning of this run, make even more ridiculous to it. I don't like the character, and this doesn't help and everything, and it really actually hurts the story. The book was actually doing good, even with the improper, this happened before the main story that was kind of in the middle of it. The book itself was actually pretty good. It's probably one of the strongest issues I've seen from Zeb Wells since the Hobgoblin. And of course, speaking of the Hobgoblin, we finally get a little bit of a piece of that side story as we find out Ned Leeds has everything dropped about him, that he was brainwashed, and thanks to Betty and Spider-Man, even though he doesn't know it's Peter that helped him, Ned finally gets to move on with his life. It feels like they're trying to just cut all these storylines, and it's not bad, mind you, but Ned turns around basically saying, well, Peter, really, what did you do for me? And he's like, hey, he did a lot for you, Ned. I don't like this real pieces because despite what was going on with Ned back during the Roger Stern storyline in the original Hobgoblin, he wasn't this much of a jerk to Peter. They actually had a friendship, and it feels like here they never were friends at all. There's not really much else to put into that, too. I mean, I like the little parts between Robbie and Peter early in the first story about telling him about he got a severance package from Oscorp and that he's not looking for really going back into photographies, which Robbie does, too, but also talking about he was aware of what was going on with Janice Lincoln and the fact that he was trying to convince them to, turn on Tombstone. It's actually a pretty decent issue, but the Paul storyline really takes the main part out of the whole storyline, and the kind of out-of-place storyline to kind of explain how it all got set up feels out of place too, versus they would have led with that and went to the main Tombstone story after everything. I think it would have worked a little bit better. I'm actually going to give the issue a B. It's actually not bad at all. Actually, it's really good. The artwork is great by John Romita Jr. as well as Scott Hanna. The pacing with Tombstone actually feels good. You do feel like there's a story arc coming to end here, and the fact that this character arc with Tombstone, Zeb Wells has actually been shepherding correctly, and is one of the strongest things out of his entire 2.5-year run on Spider-Man. So I'm going to give it a B, folks. It was a pretty decent issue, except for the Paul flashback and the kind of out-of-place storyline. So that's what I'll give it. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to actually call it for a couple weeks here. I hope you've enjoyed everything and enjoyed my reviews this August and everything. So for more information, go ahead and check us out on the SpidermanCrawlspace.com. If you like these videos, please leave a comment and think about liking and subscribing and hitting that bell for notification every time I drop some reviews. I have some more coming up as we get into September here. It'll be a little past the reads and Amazing Spider-Man to start looking at some more satellite titles here too as time allows. So I want to thank you all for your support, and of course Brad, Peter, Neil, everyone over there, Dark Mark, and everybody on the Crawl Space for their support all these last couple years I've been doing this, and through all the times and everything. So thank you so much, guys, for your reviews and your support in these last couple years. And with that note, guys, I'll see everybody later on the Crawl Space.